Check, 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 1, 2, check, check. Check, 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 1, 2, check, check. Check. Ooh, a little hot. If we have some tape or rubber band or something. Yeah, rubber band, I think. Yeah, or 2. Something to keep it from. Would you like me to extinguish that? Start off. Okay. No problem. Yeah, well, it might be too tight so that you wouldn't be able to open the box. We can have the box slightly. Hi.
Good morning. You do not need to rush to your seats. We're not starting worship just yet. But since you are here early, good job. You must be familiar with our parking. I wanted to take a moment to just rehearse something because you're going to be singing the song that I'm singing. In fact, you're going to be my accompaniment. And so before we get to that point in the service, I just want to rehearse it with you and explain also that I'm using what's called a loop pedal. That's going to allow me to sing all the parts that you will be singing, but recorded in advance. So, if you are a bass or an alto, or you had a wild night and you're just singing low, your part is going to be. I got to wait, so there's 4 counts of each note. 2, 3, 4. We go back to your first note and then. Okay? So not quite as far the second time. Let's
And that musical introduction, ladies and gentlemen, is our melodic way of saying good morning and welcome to another Sunday here at First Unitarian Society, where independent thinkers gather in a safe, nurturing environment to explore issues of social, spiritual, and ethical significance as we try to make a difference in this world. And speaking of things that are different in this world, I'm Steve Goldberg, a proud, extraordinary member of this congregation. And I'm pleased to show off my new summer haircut this morning, and also offer a special welcome to any guests, visitors, or newcomers. If this is your first time at First Unitarian Society, I think you'll find that it's a special place. And if you'd like to learn a little bit more about our special buildings, we'll be conducting a guided tour right after the service today. Just gather over here by the windows after the service and we'll take good care of you. Speaking of taking care of each other, I think you know the drill by now. Make sure that you silence those pesky electronic devices which you just will not need during the next hour, because you'll be enjoying the service instead. A service that I know will touch your heart, stir your spirit, and trigger one or two new thoughts. We're glad you're here, and we invite you now to join in a moment of centering silence so we can be fully present with each other this morning.
And now let us rise in all the ways that we do to sing Morning Has Broken. Morning has broken like the first morning. Blackbird has spoken like the first bird. Praise for the singing, praise for the morning. Praise for them springing fresh from the Word. Sweet the rain's new fall, sunlit from heaven, like the first dew fall on the first grass. Praise for the sweetness of a wet garden, sprung in completeness where God's feet pass. Mine is the sunlight, mine is the morning, born of the one light, Eden's a play. Praise with elation, praise every morning, God's recreation of the new day.
Remaining standing for our opening words and then the lighting of our chalice. T.S. Eliot writes, "Let us return to the truth that the older patterns of human meaning shaping stories has us understand cataclysmic change as essential to the very nature of things, not as the evil intruder in our lives." If you will join us in our chalice lighting words, continuing with T.S. Eliot's writings, as together we say, "We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all of our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time." I invite you to turn towards each other and share a greeting. If you have arrived here today with a sorrow so heavy that you need the help of this community to carry it, or if you came with a joy so great that it simply must be shared, now is the time for you to speak. The sharing of joys and sorrows is our time, in the spirit of acceptance and support, to share with one another the special events or circumstances in our lives that has affected us deeply, or the lives of a loved one in recent days or weeks. So for the next few minutes, anyone who wishes is invited to come forward to the front of the auditorium, light a candle, and using the microphone provided by our lay minister, Ann Smiley, your name, and briefly share with us your message. You can also come forward and wordlessly light a candle and return to your seat. And if you are unable to come forward to light a candle, please raise your hand and we will bring the microphone to you and light a candle on your behalf. And so I now open the floor for the sharing of sorrows and joys.
I'm happy to share that after her stem cell transplant, Amina Morsal is back at home and feeling a little better.
I'm Lorna Aronson, and I am just such a proud grandmother. You know, you just don't want to bump into a proud grandmother because there's no end. But what I'm so proud of is that my granddaughters in San Francisco, from the time they were each 7 years old, they're now 13 and 15, have raised funds every year together to march in the San Francisco AIDS Walk. This year, the two of them together raised $2,270 for AIDS work in San Francisco. And I am just so beyond proud and so hopeful for what the world can be with children like that coming up.
Yes. I'm Tom Heine, and this is unfortunately two losses. I don't see her here today, but our long-term member Amy Kell lost her puppy of 15 years yesterday, Lonnie. So if you see her, give her a hug. And I lost my brother of 82 years a month ago, and we're going to plant him on top of my father's grave in October. So that's going to be kind of meaningful. Two veterans, one on top of the other.
Okay, well, I have a joy. It is my daughter Lucinda's 6th birthday this Wednesday. Do you want to wave, honey? Yeah. But we're celebrating
Happy
it
birthday.
today.
I left a really toxic workplace and got a new job, and it only took a month of being unemployed.
Congrats. Wow.
So my name's Harry Carnes. Some of you know me. And I have a joy because Monday was my birthday, and I was lucky enough to be able to invite some of my friends over. I was sort of overwhelmed by the fact that I had so many friends, I couldn't invite you all. I mean, I just was really overwhelmed by how many wonderful people are in my life, and it's just great. So thank you all. You guys will get invited to the next one.
I'm Judy Troya. This is for my friend Jim Smith, who died recently, a longtime UU friend from Wausau, a friend of Anne's parents. We will miss him.
Yes, we will. He grew up in Partyville. Nobody knows Partyville.
I'm Jim, and it's great that this morning we have so many joys. My joy comes from last Sunday after church. I was wearing this shirt down on State Street, and two women I had never seen before came up and said, "Hi, we're UUs too." What other denomination would do that? That shows how we're all connected.
I have a joy. My name is Corinne Hagland. I'm a member of the Montreal Unitarian Universalist Church. I'm just so grateful. Oh boy. Our church is tiny. It's so nice to see all of you. I'm so grateful that my son gets to spend time in Madison in this wonderful community with my parents without us. And he gets to develop his own relationship with them in this great community with my parents. So it's a pleasure to see all of you, and it's nice to see so many UUs. And my daughter is now spending time here too, which is great. Thank you.
And we now light one last candle to hold the joys and sorrows that are still too tender to share. As we light these candles, may it be an invitation to more caring and connected community. May we each find in our own way a path to reach out in compassion and love to each other. So may it be. I invite you to rise in all the ways that we do, and let's join together in hymn 1007. Our children are invited as we sing together to move to summer fun.
There's a river flowing in my soul. There's a river flowing in my soul, and it's telling me that I'm somebody. There's a river flowing in my soul. There's a river flowing in my heart. There's a river flowing in my heart, and it's telling me that I'm somebody. There's a river flowing in my heart. Flowing in my mind, there's a river flowing in my mind. There's a river flowing a river flowing. Let's go one more time. River in my soul. There's a river flowing in my soul. There's a river flowing in my soul. Oh, it's telling me that I'm somebody. There's a river flowing in my soul.
You may be seated. It has been said, and it is actually true, that there are basically 3 or 4 sermons that every preacher has to preach in their career. And so, one way or another, in a variety of forms, you get to hear the same message disguised, sometimes not very cleverly, in a variety of ways. But it is also true that there are some sermons that are almost never preached, and often their content is just as important, but they tend to speak about things that, while eternally and deeply true in our midst, are more complicated for us to explore together. And so I first preached sermons similar to this, but in many ways, so different, in 2011. And there were a variety of reasons that I decided to take on the topic, but the one moment that finally made me cross over into actually doing it was one evening when I went out to dinner right before I had an evening meeting at church. So I was by myself and I was looking at notes to get ready for that meeting. And seated next to me was an entire table of young women who were happily chatting with each other, and their conversation pretty much passed over my head as I was looking at my notes. And somewhere towards the end of my meal, I happened to look up, really for the first time from my thinking about what was coming up in a few minutes, and noticed that the news had been on various televisions throughout the restaurant. And the news started on this report how somewhere in the United States there was a massive flood that had taken out miles and miles of homes and changed people's lives. And the very next news story was how across the U.S. there was a major earthquake that had done incredible damage. And then the very next story was how hundreds of birds had mysteriously fallen dead in a town in Texas. And I was just waiting for some report about the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse in Georgia to be the next news story. But I noticed that the table next to me had gotten exceedingly quiet. And I looked over, and the reason that they were so quiet is that one of the young women at the table had begun to cry. Actually, she had begun to sob uncontrollably and was mortified how hard she was crying in a public restaurant. And her friends formed a little cocoon of support and care for her until she got to the place where she could speak. And she said, first very quietly, "I am just so scared all the time. I mean, I have 3 children that I'm trying to raise, and my husband and I work all day long, and I am not even a religious person, but I feel like we are living in a really terrible time on this planet. And what scares me most is that it feels like my children will grow up into a world that is even more difficult. And I'm not sure that there's anything that I can do to save them from it. I feel like it is exactly what people describe as the end times. And her friends looked at her with deep compassion, and it seemed to me some sense of sympathy. And I realized that actually over the months I had heard people tell me similar anxieties about their life and the larger life. And yet we had never really talked about it openly as a community of faith. And so I did. And we explored what we would do about that sense of the difficulty of the world that we live in. Well, just a few months ago, I began to wonder if it was time for us to think about this together again, about the sort of sense of the world right now and the various ways that that makes us feel. But what actually inspired me to move forward and talk about it with you was actually a very strange source, a gateway actually to feeling hopeful most of the time about the future that I learned from a close friend of mine who it is a podcast that he and many of his friends listen to regularly, and he is 28 years old, and it is called Harry Potter and the Sacred Text. And it is basically two millennials, Casper de Kyle and Vanessa Zoltan, both of whom hold Masters of Divinity from Harvard Divinity School. And Casper works with Krista Tippett as part of the On Being organization, and Vanessa Zoltan is a humanist chaplain at Harvard. And every week, they talk together about a text that they consider sacred. And they say that a text is sacred if it may inspire at least two very passionate and different perspectives on the same text, and may also invite people to learn from each other in meaningful dialogue about that text. In other words, probably almost every text in the world has that possibility, which sounds very Unitarian Universalist. But together they do this exegesis on a text that they grew up loving dearly, and it helps them think about meaningful themes. And yes, the text is Harry Potter. However, the theme of this episode of the broadcast was the apocalypse. And they were joined by a Harvard Divinity professor who specializes in basically interfaith dialogue, Matthew Potts. And the essence of the podcast was exploring that many people in the millennial generation and all generations believe that climate change, with some considerable support from science, such as journalist Marshall Shepard writing, the fact that carbon dioxide values are increasing significantly, and that the naturally varying climate system is responding to the new system and stimulus, the way naturally growing grass responds to fertilizer on the lawn. And the rate of the change of our climate is faster and more intense than we ever expected. They went on to talk about how many people they know believe that what will happen with the climate will significantly change the lives of people alive now, and certainly may really change the lives of the children that are growing up. To me, in some way, talking about that with you, with a spirit of compassion and with a sense of how important it is for us to be in this together and talk about it, seems essential. And it reminded me that one of the sort of forms of thinking that we almost never talk about as Unitarian Universalists is essential to that. Because the questions that are raised by thinking about the future of who we are as human beings is very much in line with what is called eschatology. Eschatology is the exploration of human thought about the ultimate destiny of humanity and the state of the world itself. And it comes from the Greek word eschatos, which means last. And it explores what we human beings believe about all sorts of final things. What ultimately is the meaning of our lives? What do we do with our own finitude? What do we believe will happen to the human species in the future? Why wouldn't we talk about such important things together? Why wouldn't we explore that as a faithful community? Because those questions, one way or another, are very much alive in our world right now. And there's a lot of powerful ancient stories that help us think about that. The scriptures that we know of as the Bible begin with the Hebrew scriptures' description of how things came into being, and they end with the Greek scriptures' depiction of what is often referred to as the eschaton, the end of the world. And the actual images and questions and issues raised by these stories deal with two different forms of human thought: cosmogony and eschatology. And over the centuries, many different ideas have come forth from thinking about how it is we come into being and what we are here to do with our precious lives, and how we think about all of the endings in our lives, and the various ways that we know what to do with those powerful interplay bookends. Forest Church, our departed UU minister, put it this way: religion is the human response to being alive and having to die. So while it is the case that much of our mythologies around creation and final destiny are in large and epic images, it is really our most personal and deepest connections that are the genesis of how we think about why we are here and what we are called to do. It is our very own, very human experiences of possibility, pain, and loss that are the most telling about the foundational ideas about all last things and how they can be understood.
Dear Brandon, today my rose has come to a cataclysmic end. I just broke up with Jeff. I know, you may be thinking, haven't we only been dating for 2 weeks? But let me just hasten to say, this was the real deal. And the only boy I will ever love. You, of all people, should know how I've been saving my deepest feelings for the true love or my
So it is really only through the most personal of losses that begin very early in our life that we begin to have emotional connections with the deeper losses in our lives. And so some sermons offer possible solutions to basic human difficulties, but this sermon really is meant to hold space for something that has been close to the surface for a long time in our culture and has played itself out again and again in the human story. At its best, I believe that religious community seeks to courageously raise what is true within our culture and within our community. It invites us to visit the longer and older human stories and look for both common ground and to point out things that are unique about this time. It asks us to remember that in the midst of such complicated and difficult issues that we really are deeply interdependent, and that it is both what happens to us as individuals and as the larger community that matters in this time. And so there is considerable worth in grappling with the stories that our forebears also struggled with, in the essential question in the midst of how we understand the ongoing flow of our creation and what happens to our lives. Some cultures, as I've already talked about, have a definite sense of a time, as in the Hebrew scriptures and the Greek scriptures, where we come into the world and we live our lives. And the flow of history in this mythology comes to a place of culmination. But many cultures view the flow of life differently, as in this succession of repetitive cycles, as in the Indian notion of yuga and kalpa. And in those understandings of the world, it is only a sort of relative eschatology that exists, in which human beings in their own lives seek liberation from the weary cycle of death and rebirth and escape into some sort of eternal and timeless reality. And in most primordial religions, eschatology plays almost no major role whatsoever because their understanding of the world is based on the notion of the cyclical renewal that is a part of the cycle of nature itself. They emphasize that it is natural for them to be part of an ongoing cycle of birth and death, and that their images of the divine are both their demise and their salvation. It seems to be true, however, at least in this culture, that times of great war and political power and the human realities that those forces create often have us thinking in an apocalyptic manner. And if you go back into human history, there are more times in human history that a great percentage of the population believed that they were living in the end times because of that truth. The thing is, it may be wired in our DNA, at least in this culture and in this mythology, for us to find ourselves thinking in times of great distress that it portends some doom in our future that may not be held by all cultures. And yet, the reality of the story is that there were often very powerful reasons. There were great famines or mass disease or natural cataclysms or war itself. And in truth, in those people's lives, there were so many changes and deaths that for them it was experienced as a cataclysm, as an apocalypse. And so, if we are in a place where we are thinking about the future of the world, how do we do that work together? What sort of things will help us engage our thoughts about the future? We have no way of knowing for sure what will happen with our climate or with the human race or how we live together on this planet. But how do we help each other with the natural anxiety of this time? John Fletcher, who works with Kubler-Ross, suggests these things. He says that number one, it is important for each of us to do what we can in our lives to address the larger concern. And so here at FUS, for instance, we are taking very seriously the power of the climate crisis in our midst. We have made that theme one of the most important themes of social justice work in the next 2 years and probably beyond. And we invite you in the fall, on September 20th, to heed the call of youth from around the world and join us in the global climate strike. On September 20th, on that day, FUS will close its doors and join our youth. And we hope thousands, if not millions, of people around the world who will side with love and with our youth, and the possibility that this could be a turning point to stand up to fossil fuel industries and move in the direction of green lives and products and of life itself. And so if you would like to be a part of that work, you can talk to Tim Corden, either catch him today or give him a call or send him an email. Fletcher also suggests, number two, that we think about our own personal lives, that often the stresses in our own life are as essential to how we see the larger life. And so to take seriously that the ways that we engage the things that feel out of sync and out of order are important to how we deal with the world around us. Number three, he reminds us that in this time we need each other's deeper relationships. And so he invites us to be aware of relationships that feel like they need extra energy and reconciliation. That when we are anxious about the world in which we live in, it causes greater stress between relationships. And that this is an important time for you to rally and bring about reconciliation in the relationships that matter most to you if you are able. And finally, he points out that the only way to move into a time that feels difficult and overwhelming is with a spirit of gratitude and hope. That if we go into the future with a sense of despair and of hopelessness, we will be so unable to access the energy and the right thought in the way of moving forward that allows us to take agency in our lives and in the greater life together. We know that worrying about the future is not new. Edmund Spencer was born in 1552 and died at the age of 47. And his last poem was actually about a betrothal to marriage. But Spencer had lived a long time with much anxiety about the future of the world. And in many ways, his last poem was as much a meditation of his thoughts about life as it was about the possibility of love. As we make our way through this time, together, we explore so many different issues about the world that we live in. But ultimately, here, we find ways to regain a sense of hope, a sense of possibility, a sense of working together for justice. Spencer wrote this: "Calm was the day, and through the trembling air, sweet-breathing Zephyrus did softly play, in a gentle spirit that lightly did delay high Titan's beams, and then did with glister fair, when I, whom sullen care, through discontent of my long fruitless stay in Prince's court, expected idle hope, and still doth fly away like empty shadows, and afflict my brain. And so I walked forth among the shores of the Thames, whose ruddy banks and river hymns, and was painted by all the variable flowers, and the meadows adorned with dainty gems, and fit bedecked maiden bowers, and crowned their paramours. And the bridal day, which is not long, sweet Thames runs softly till I end my song. So, may thy country be freed from foreign harms, and great Elysius' glorious name may ring through all the world, though filled with wide alarms. Upon the bridal day, which is not long, sweet Thames runs softly till I end my song.
To whomever finds this letter, I hope someone does. It has been 2 days since all of this happened, and I have seen nothing. I decided that I'm going to strike out tomorrow in search of something. Anything. Anyone. I have never felt so alone. I did not think it was possible to feel this solitary. But I refuse to give up hope. Before I go, I want to set down on paper some memories of my life, just in case everything we know really has been lost. In my mind, I know that is a possibility, but I can't really process it. I remember just last week being compelled to stop on the way home, to sit in my car at sunset looking out over the lake, the window down, the wind blowing sweet and cool on my face. The smell of a weekend breakfast drifting up the stairs. Eggs, turkey sausage, fresh rolls, coffee. Geez, that sounds like the last act of the play Arta. Oh, Earth, you are too wonderful for anybody to realize you. Do any human beings
There are many ways that we share the gift of life with each other. We come here to cultivate hope, to find a way to live into that hope and change the world. As we prepare to receive the offering, may we think about all of the gifts that we've been given in our lives, in the way that by being part of a larger community, connected to the larger world, we continue to change the world every day. May that spirit of abundance be present in our hearts as the offering is now given and received. So may it be.
So thank you for your generosity during the offertory. And in addition to appreciating financial generosity, this congregation also appreciates the generosity of time. And we would like to acknowledge those volunteers whose time and talent have enabled us to enjoy today's service as the offertory continues. Our lay minister, Ann Smiley. Our greeters were Claire Box and Dorrit Bergen. Our ushers, Marty Hollis, Rich DeVita, and Michael Losi. Our hospitality is being provided by 3 family members, so you get to thank a whole family in the kitchen. Franz, Eleni, and Eleanor Musarad Varga. That's a first. Pamela McMullen is staffing the information table. Hathaway Hassler makes sure that our vegetation up here is vibrant and green. And our tour guide today is John Powell. Just a couple announcements. One is that the staff wants you to remember that on Wednesday of this week, the office will be closed because they'll be enjoying and participating in a special retreat session. And a reminder about Service Sunday, which is going to be August 18, so in a few weeks, where we have an opportunity to gather in support of projects that will enhance the FUS buildings and grounds. So gardening work and organizing the basement, that'd be my favorite. Dusting the commons, cleaning the living room, the Gabler living room, baking cookies with kids, and a few other tasks that focus on our own little but very important community. So August 18, Sunday, right after the service. More details in your Red Floors bulletin. So end of the announcements. I invite you now to enjoy the closing hymn.
Let's rise in all the ways that we do to sing together hymn number 136. Where gentle tides go rolling by along the salt sea strand, the colors blend and roll as one together in the sand. And often do the winds incline to send their distant call, the quiet joys of humankind when love embraces all. Where road and wheat together rise among the common ground, the mare and stallion, light and dark, have thunder in their sound. The rainbow sign, the blended flood, still have my heart enthralled. The quiet joys of what we share, where love embraces all. But we have come to plow the tides, the oat lies on the ground. I hear their fires in the field, they drive the stallion down. The roses bloom both light and dark, the winds do seldom call. The running sands recall the time when love embraces all.
And now, as we prepare to leave this place, our song has not ended. Every day we are called to find a new way to sing that song for life. What is it that we will do with this life? What will we create? That is our work together. We extinguish this chalice, but not the wisdom that carries us through the ages, not the courage and the fire that it offers, not the sense of compassion and its tender warmth. Those remain in your lives until you gather in this place again. I invite you to take a seat one more time to receive one more gift of music.